Hollywood often sells Roman warfare as a choreographed display of military might, clean, heroic, and full of cinematic glory. But real Roman battles were nothing of the sort. No roaring crowds, no dramatic speeches, just eerie silence, physical exhaustion, and relentless commands. The reality? It began not with a clash of swords, but with a different kind of labor, digging. The day before any clash, Roman soldiers took up shovels instead of weapons. Tens of thousands transformed into an ancient construction crew, turning their encampment into a fortified zone. These weren't casual trenches. They were military-grade defenses. Engineers ordered ditches so deep they'd swallow horses and wide enough to make even the bravest foot soldiers hesitate. The dirt didn't just get pushed aside. It was packed and built up into walls, bristling with sharpened wooden stakes. Primitive, yet brutally effective. Every campsite was more like a fortress than a resting place, complete with gates, lookout towers, and enough paranoia to prepare for a surprise attack at any moment. This exhausting grunt work consumed hours, but it often meant the difference between survival and slaughter at dawn. Then came inspection time. Every single piece of gear, helmets, breastplates, sandals, and swords, was scrutinized by centurions with all the warmth of a tax auditor. A loose strap, dull edge, or worn sole could earn a harsh punishment. Roman quality checks weren't suggestions, they were law. Compared to them, modern safety protocols seemed downright friendly. Meals were practical, not pleasurable. Soldiers crushed wheat into flour, mixed water with sun-dried meat, and choked down their daily ration of pasca, a vinegar-laced wine that tasted as unpleasant as it sounds. Still, nobody dared complain. Apparently, bad army food jokes were a later invention. Organization was everything. Officers arranged the legions into their signature triple-line structure. Every cohort and century knew its exact place in the machine. Battle plans demanded the same level of coordination as a royal wedding, with far bloodier consequences for being out of step. The rest of the daylight was spent in meticulous weapon prep. Swords, gladi, were honed to razor sharpness. Leather armor was tightened, shields rebound with rawhide. Every soldier became their own blacksmith, tailor, and quartermaster rolled into one. When night fell, comfort was a luxury no one expected. Soldiers curled up on cold ground, using shields as pillows and cloaks as makeshift blankets. The only softness came from ritual, private prayers to Mars and household gods, whispered offerings exchanged for hopes of survival. It wasn't celebration. It was a grim acceptance of what was coming. Morning broke not with sunlight, but with the shrill blasts of war horns. The organized chaos began. Soldiers snapped into their roles like gears in a machine. The formation was methodical. The young and eager hastati took the front, seasoned principes behind them, and the hardened triarii stood ready in the rear. Every man took up exactly 3 feet of space, enough to swing a blade, not enough to flee. Their bronze helmets were protective but impractical. Narrow eye slits restricted vision, and cheek guards blocked sound. Most soldiers could only see forward and hear what was immediately around them. In the midst of organized violence, awareness narrowed to a sliver. Orders traveled through horn calls, waving flags, and horseback couriers. Each unique sound or signal conveyed a different command. Advance, hold, turn, retreat. Only the officers knew them all. The rest followed reflex, muscle memory, and trust in the man next to them. Then came the wait. The long, blistering, anxious wait. Under a burning sun, metal armor turned into personal ovens. Tunics soaked in sweat, bodies stiffened from holding position. The noise of approaching enemy drums wasn't just heard, it was felt in the earth beneath their feet. It was like standing in line at a bureaucratic office from hell, knowing that the clerk at the end might try to kill you. Fear moved through the ranks like a cold wind. Some men froze. Others trembled. A few vomited from the stress. Centurions stalked the lines, barking corrections and adjusting stances. Encouragement came with threats. The Roman army's philosophy? Fear your commander more than your enemy. Still, one rule towered above all: do not move unless ordered. It was drilled into them with such intensity that Roman training made modern boot camps look like summer camps. And then it happened. The horns screamed. The line surged forward, not in a wild sprint, but in a synchronized, purposeful walk. This was no chaotic movie charge. It was mechanical, intentional. Officers paced alongside the formation, shouting corrections, keeping every man in place. At 15 to 30 meters from the enemy, the air thickened with tension. Thousands of soldiers hurled their pila, javelins designed not just to kill, but to break the enemy's confidence. Their soft iron tips bent on impact, mangling shields and forcing opponents to abandon them. Roman weapon engineers had perfected the art of battlefield frustration. Immediately after, the legionaries drew their short swords and braced for close combat. When impact came, it was explosive. Shields slammed, bodies collided. It was less a sword fight than a brutal collision of meat, metal, and momentum. Strategy melted into chaos. There was no room for flair, just quick thrusts and defensive bashes. Soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, each man guarding his neighbor, each movement a potential kill. The Roman strategy was built on teamwork. Loses that, and you lost your life. Their secret weapon? Rotation. Fresh men from the rear stepped in as the front grew tired. Worn soldiers shuffled back to catch their breath, creating a deadly conveyor belt of violence. Roman battle lines had break times, and every man prayed he'd live long enough to reach his. Officers prowled constantly, watching for gaps, replacing the fallen, and ensuring the line held. The noise was deafening, clanging metal, screams, roars of command, all blending into an overwhelming soundscape. Verbal orders vanished in the roar. Soldiers reacted to motion, not words. Even with all this discipline, things could fall apart fast. One breach, a single cracked segment, could unravel everything. If the enemy broke through even a small section, they could sweep sideways, turning structure into slaughter. In Roman warfare, it wasn't glory that won battles. It was grit, preparation, and the terrifying understanding that discipline, not heroism, kept you alive. When formations broke down in battle, the psychological toll often spread far faster than the physical chaos. Soldiers who moments earlier fought with confidence suddenly found themselves being attacked from unfamiliar angles. Fear, once sparked, surged through the ranks like wildfire through dry fields, or like gossip in a small town. Swift, disruptive, and impossible to contain, the battlefield quickly transformed from organized lines into a deadly maze. Fallen men, whether dead or wounded, became obstacles underfoot. Pools of blood turned the ground slick, and uneven terrain suddenly became a threat in itself when every step meant life or death. Communication, always a challenge during battle, completely disintegrated in the midst of a collapse. The signals from horns were lost in the overwhelming noise. Clashing metal, screaming men, pounding hooves. Trying to issue orders amid this storm was like attempting to deliver a speech during a lightning strike. Technically possible, but practically hopeless. Retreat wasn't a simple escape plan. Roman soldiers trying to fall back found themselves blocked by their own rear ranks or caught in terrain traps with nowhere to go. And in the thick of confusion, disaster took on new forms. Units became disoriented. Friends were mistaken for enemies. Chaos blurred loyalties, and mistakes turned fatal. Even the most disciplined units had contingency plans, but pulling them off required officers to lead with clarity and courage in the middle of mental and physical mayhem. Some cohorts managed to fall back in formation or regroup into defensive squares, but these actions demanded quick thinking from leaders who were often just as dazed as the men they commanded. Ironically, the deadliest moments of the battle didn't always come during the first clash, but during its unraveling. As soldiers fled, they made easy targets. Enemy cavalry exploited the disarray, chasing down retreating infantry with ruthless efficiency. Dying in retreat, in full flight from the battlefield, was possibly the most frustrating fate imaginable. Like losing a marathon with the finish line in sight, cavalry became kings of the battlefield during these critical moments. Roman horsemen sometimes managed to turn the tide by striking enemy flanks, but enemy cavalry could just as easily transform a withdrawal into a full-scale massacre. For those who survived such breakdowns, the mental scars often cut deeper than the physical wounds. The trauma lingered long after the noise died down. Ancient medicine had no diagnosis for such suffering. Silence after the battle was just as haunting as the chaos that came before it. In the eerie calm that followed, the survivors faced an impossible task: sorting through a battlefield littered with thousands of bodies, sometimes spread over miles. The first job was identifying the fallen, friend from foe, a difficult task when mud, blood, and shattered armor masked any recognizable features. Recovering from this wasn't just about closure. It was about necessity. Roman soldiers wasted no time stripping valuables from enemy corpses. This wasn't looting. It was compensation. Battlefield scavenging was standard operating procedure, often the only chance a low-ranking soldier had to earn anything beyond his ration. The dead didn't need coin. The living desperately did. Meanwhile, Roman medics, equipped with leather kits, vinegar for antiseptic, and crude iron instruments, rushed to save who they could. They cauterized wounds with hot metal, wrapped injuries with linen strips, and did their best with the limited tools available. For many, the battlefield surgeon was the difference between life and death. Identifying fallen comrades brought deeply personal grief. Soldiers searched the faces and belongings of the dead, looking for familiar marks, trinkets, or old scars. Burial customs were shaped by time, manpower, and status. Enemy bodies were tossed into mass graves, dug by captives. Roman dead were treated with more care, if time allowed. Captives introduced their own dilemmas. Fit, uninjured prisoners could be sold off as slaves, a profitable if grim reward. But wounded captives were often executed. Mercy was rarely an option when resources were limited and emotions still raw. Redistributing gear from the fallen followed a strict pecking order. Officers claimed the best spoils. Regular soldiers received whatever remained. Roman military efficiency didn't stop at the battlefield edge. Even in blood-soaked fields, there was paperwork, structure, and bureaucracy. Promotions were earned, but payments? Those were another story. Wages often arrived late, if at all. Corrupt commanders sometimes pocketed shares meant for their men. Months could pass before compensation came, and many soldiers retired having never received their full due. Medical discharge existed for the wounded, but the process was notoriously tangled and unfair. It turns out ancient military welfare systems worked about as well as you'd expect, inefficient and full of loopholes. And yet, for all the broken bones and shattered psyches, The worst wounds weren't physical. Veterans carried invisible burdens, nightmares, sudden outbursts, shaking hands. Roman society had no vocabulary for trauma, no formal support for mental recovery. The expectation? Get over it. Buck up. March on. There was no leave for mourning. Armies resumed movement within 24 hours if possible. The dead were left in shallow graves. Time couldn't be wasted. Disease, enemy reinforcements, or delay in campaign plans were all bigger concerns than grief. Mental health days didn't exist on Roman timetables. Victory brought spoils, but unevenly. Generals claimed the lion's share. Regular soldiers divided what was left. Sometimes land grants followed a successful campaign, letting veterans settle on conquered territories. But again, bureaucracy and favoritism often determined who actually got what. Disabled veterans faced a cruel post-war reality. Some received small pensions. Others were left to fend for themselves, the glory of service fading fast in the cold light of peacetime. Roman society celebrated strength, but didn't know how to handle weakness, especially the invisible kind. Many veterans never truly left the battlefield. Some managed to carve out civilian lives by leaning into what they knew best: violence, discipline, and vigilance. They became vigils, Rome's version of urban police, worked as private bodyguards, or opened gladiator schools where they trained the next generation for blood sport. These weren't just jobs. They were continuations of a life forged in war. Roles that didn't require them to erase what they'd witnessed or pretend they hadn't survived the unthinkable. Official reports, however, painted a different picture. Battles were sanitized into tales of valor. Commanders crafted glorious dispatches that padded their reputations, carefully avoiding the messy truth of who bled, who broke, and who never came home. Mental wounds? Not even a footnote. And still, many soldiers stayed in service for years, some for decades. Their lives became a blur of marching, bloodshed, and the occasional respite before being thrown back into the storm. Retirement wasn't a reward. It was a distant fantasy, a finish line most never reached in one piece. These conditions forged more than warriors. They forged a culture, a mindset that idolized toughness, emotional silence, and relentless duty. But behind the stoic faces and weathered armor were men grappling with a question no one had prepared them to answer. How do you return to normal after war rewires your soul? What do you think? Could you have survived in that world? Or would the battle never have ended for you either? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're drawn to history's raw, unfiltered truths, the parts no textbook dares to show, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Vassal Truths. Because here, we go beyond the polished past. We dive deep into the blood, grit, and resilience that shaped real lives. This is where forgotten warriors are remembered, and the hidden cost of history comes to light. Stick around. There's much more waiting in the shadows.